So let's meet our guests for this week. Andy Salford, Labour MP for Corby, and also Rupert Reid, who is the Green Party lead candidate at the forthcoming European elections and the party's transport spokesperson, which is where I'd like to start with the scenes of extraordinary chaos in Northampton this week. This is the gridlock in the town centre as a result of the opening of a new bus station. The police had to be called in to help clear the traffic. Roads to the town centre had to be blocked off, and engineers worked through the night to change parts of the road layout. Andy Salford, clearly a huge embarrassment for the council after this new bus station was launched. Was it simply unfortunate, or do you think it was an oversight?
Well, it's a growing town, the county town in my area. This was absolutely foreseeable. They've gone from a very large bus station to a much smaller one. They hadn't planned it properly, and just as when they closed roads around the A43 improvements in Corby, they didn't properly communicate with the public and think about how to manage it.
Rupert Reid, is there just only so much traffic that an urban centre like this can take?
Well, I think Andy's right in what he just said, but I think we also need to look at the deeper roots of the problem. In Northampton, we haven't had any park and ride, we haven't had a guided busway. That's very interesting, by the way. Sally Keeble, the former Labour MP for Northampton, essentially stymied the guided busway project and then went on to go on to open one in Cambridge. We haven't really had anything. All we have is this inadequate bus station. Where's the vision? What we're saying in the Greens is there needs to be far more serious investment in public transport, because that is the future.
All right, thanks for the moment. Now, spring may be in the air, but no one will forget, of course, the damage caused by the storms this winter. Flood defences in the east were put under enormous pressure, and that's raised questions over how much to spend on flooding and where. Many rural communities here feel abandoned by the government, as Richard Daniel now reports.
It's been a winter people on our coast won't forget. Onslaught after onslaught, a tidal surge, breached defences, seemingly relentless storms, all taking their toll on sea defences. Now the criteria used to decide what we spend on defences and where are being challenged. Some argue the approach to defending our coast is flawed and needs a radical overhaul. Linda Lodge is among them. In 2006 she bought her bungalow on the cliff at Scratby in Norfolk. Just a few years ago the policy here was to defend this stretch of coast. Not anymore. Now plans to extend a successful rock defence to protect the eroding cliff have also failed to qualify for funding.
They're not going to do the rock burn. I think that was 3 million. And to do the cages with the stones is £500,000. That's not an awful lot of money to save a village. And it will be saving the whole village. It's not just saving these houses along the cliff top. Because if we go, the houses behind will go. We thought we had a good 50, 60 years here. And now, what could it be, 3 years, 5 years? Who knows?
DEFRA rules state for each pound spent on new defences, £8 of damage must be prevented by them. Scratby, like the Somerset levels, doesn't qualify. The council leader says the rules fail to take into account the millions of pounds that tourism here brings to the local economy every year.
The £8 benefit to the pound spend on defences is a nonsense. It's just never going to help places like Scratby or Winterton or Hemsby along our coastline. Huge amount of stake. I mean, I don't know how many millions that the villages bring into the local economy, but it is millions.
Scratby isn't alone. There are scores of flood defence projects that are on hold effectively because those projects can't attract the funding needed. So what do communities that are under threat do? Well, increasingly some are scrabbling around to try to find the money themselves. 5 years ago at East Lane at Bawdsey in Suffolk, they did just that. Landowners donated 3 blocks of land for housing. The money raised helped to pay for new defences. Trouble is, there wasn't enough money to repair the entire defence. Now the sea is threatening once again. Even though the policy here is to hold the line, East Lane also fails to qualify for funding.
There's barely a single location on the entire Suffolk coastline that meets the current Environment Agency 8:1 ratio. Blythe 2, Aldenor 3 or less, Deben 0 to 2. Are we really saying we're going to abandon the entire coastline?
So is self-help the way forward? It will cost around £7 million to raise the river walls on the internationally renowned Aldernore estuary to protect it from tidal surges. A new partnership involving landowners, businesses and local people hopes to raise the money and complete the work within 10 years.
We will try to raise it by donations of land that can then be used for housing, and the development value of that land will then be able to be passed on to the Trust for funding the programme of upgrading.
Back at Scratby, there's no such hope in prospect. Here they fear the establishment of a mindset, an acceptance of the abandonment of entire communities, all while others across the water defend theirs.
I think the Dutch have spent the time and the money on getting it right. They've been there to protect their people. When you think most of the people along here are retired people, they've paid in all their lives and they're getting nothing back at all. And it just doesn't seem right.
Well, joining us from Norwich is Floods Minister Brandon Lewis, who's also the MP for Great Yarmouth, where people living in his constituency have also started work on their own sea defences this week. Hemsby gave us the most memorable images of this winter's tidal surge when houses there crashed into the sea. So, Mr Lewis, we're going to see more images like that, are we not, on the east coast, of houses crashing into the sea, because you're simply not prepared to defend our coastline?
Well, that's not quite true. When you talk to the experts such as the Environment Agency, they make clear, for example, in Hemsby, that the coastal erosion protection that we want to see in Hemsby would not necessarily have protected those properties from the tidal surge of the scour we saw back on the 5th and 6th of December. That's quite a different issue. But it is right that we want to see them protected, particularly somewhere like Hemsby that's got roughly approximate £80 million a year tourism industry. And actually one of the things we've announced today with the Coastal Communities Fund actually does give an opportunity for those types of communities to bid in. But obviously next door we've also got Scratby and other communities who want to see the money that's already been given to them spent to get those coastal erosion protections in place.
We had people in the film saying that the funding formula for them is not working and they feel abandoned.
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, Scratby, which is one of the ones mentioned, and I worked with a team in Scratby. We had the Pathfinder scheme. Great Yarmouth Borough Council still sitting on around £80,000 of their money to spend on that scheme. And it is an important area. We want to make sure that what we do in one community doesn't detrimentally affect another. But it's also important to bear in mind that particularly where we're looking at protecting and developing jobs for the future, and an area where we've got tourism, whether it's on the Suffolk coastline or the Norfolk coastline, under the new remit, the new criteria we've announced this week for the Coastal Community Fund, they can bid into that fund. So there's another opportunity for them to bid.
We heard Linda Lodge there saying that she believes it could be £500,000 to defend her home and others in Scratby. £80,000 isn't going to go anywhere, is it? It needs more funding. This coastal communities money that you keep talking about, that's lottery money, isn't it?
Oh, well, the Coastal Community Fund is going forward now £64 million, and the third round is now open. Communities can bid. It's not just local authorities, local communities, organisations, companies can bid. We've had a great success with that fund over the last couple of rounds across Norfolk and Suffolk. Actually, we've announced bids both in Suffolk and Great Yarmouth and North Norfolk just this week.
I mean, it's no good doing these things in isolation. We need to look at the bigger picture. The whole coast surely needs defending. We were hearing people earlier saying this week, if you defend parts of the coast up in Norfolk, which some people are doing at their own expense, others further down could suffer.
Well, it's absolutely right that what you do in one part of the coastline can have an impact elsewhere. That's why the experts like the Environment Agency are there to advise, to look at that, to do those assessments. That's what will be happening in Hemsby, the work being done in Hemsby now. But somebody in the report there also mentioned the Dutch, and it is true to say as well over there that they have actually retreated from parts of their coastline in order to protect other parts because of how one part affects the other.
Is that really what's at the heart of this? You're prepared to sacrifice some communities here in the east for others, basically?
Well, actually, if we look at the shoreline management plan that was approved for Great Yarmouth, for example, and across the Norfolk and Suffolk coastline, I was one of those who fought to get more protection in there, and I was pleased we managed to get that for communities, whether it's Hemsby, Scratby and Hopton, all of which we got adjusted to give them more protection. I know my colleague Norman Land did the same in North Norfolk, as did Peter Aldis and Therese Coffey for Suffolk coastline as well. So we've got that bit of more protection in there. We've also got to make sure we get the right schemes that have the right impact.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Brandon Lewis, thank you for your time today. Andy Salford, let's talk about Northamptonshire. Not much coast there, but inland flood defences. There's been a lot of money spent there, but that's because you have built-up areas. It's not fair, is it?
Well, we've had flooding in Northamptonshire and in my own constituency, a persistent problem in the centre of the town. And clearly there needs to be work in urban areas too, to, for example, clear out the grates. And, you know, I've been talking to the Environment Agency and to Northamptonshire County Council about that. But in terms of the coastal flooding, I mean, I don't think that we should abandon these communities. Clearly the government are getting this wrong at the moment, and what they're doing now is reacting to events, letting the floods have a terrible toll on communities, as we've seen in the Somerset levels, and then saying, well, we're going to pump money in there, and not giving a kind of fair deal to the coastline in this region.
Rupert Reed, let's talk about this funding formula. You have to draw the line somewhere. You know, the other side of the fence is that you can't defend everywhere. It's simply not financially possible.
That's true, but I think also that there's something wrong with basing the way that this formula works entirely on money. There's something vaguely obscene about saying a human life is worth this much money, or a beautiful view is worth that much money. We really need to get out of that kind of mindset of thinking only in terms of money, and thinking in terms of what's really, really important, the things that make our lives worth living. Now, in terms of what Brandon Lewis said about this in his piece that we just saw there, one thing which I picked up on there was that he mentioned the Environment Agency, and of course something that's very important here is that the Environment Agency are losing 550 staff who are specifically supposed to work on flood protection because of government cuts. So it really is quite outrageous of him to come on here and say that he's doing something about this when it's his government who's making the cuts.
Andy Salford, you could say it's not just about this government, it's about successive governments. We've heard MPs this week saying, look, these flood defences are 1950s, 1960s, some of them. It's successive governments that have failed to grasp it.
Well, actually, there was a great deal of work done by the last government. And that had a really beneficial effect in lots of communities over this winter. And what we were wanting to do, I think, the report by Michael Pitt a few years ago made a whole series of recommendations, and I think the government could be doing much more to implement those. But I have to say, this sort of green idea that money doesn't matter, well, of course money matters, and we've got to spend money, but let's not abandon areas in this region.
All right, we'll have to move on. Thank you. Now, to the damning reports into a federation running academy schools and a college in Luton. The government has given the Barnfield Federation a month to improve, or it could be shut down. The report said the college had wrongly claimed nearly £1 million for students it had no records of teaching, and it's lost £1.25 million on failed projects. The government has called for a complete overhaul of the organisation's structure and half of the existing governors to be replaced. Well, just 3 years ago, the Barnfield Federation was held up by the government as a beacon of the academy movement. The reports reveal that its former boss, Sir Peter Burkitt, was given 2 payoffs, holiday allowances and a car when he resigned, despite only being entitled to and asking for holiday pay. And the reports state that the investigation was prompted by the actions of whistleblowers. One former teacher told us at the end of last year, when we first highlighted the problems, just how difficult it was to report their concerns.
I did try ringing them and it was really difficult. The person at the end of the line at the Department for Education sort of said, I don't know who you need to speak to. I felt like I was going round in circles, so I gave up.
Well, Deborah McGurran raised that point with Skills Minister Matthew Hancock earlier this week.
As soon as we heard the whistleblowers' allegations, we investigated. We moved very quickly to act and to find out what was happening. And the report lays bare what was found. We've put in place new leadership already, and we'll do whatever it takes to make sure we get the highest possible education standards for students and potential students in the area.
We've spoken to whistleblowers who wanted to report to the DFE and they had terrible trouble in doing so. Some whistleblowers told me that they've been waiting on the phone for 20 minutes to report their concerns.
What's happened since we got those allegations from the whistleblowers demonstrates how quickly and comprehensively we've dealt with this problem.
What if the governors want to see Barnfield kept together? Will you back them in that, or do you want to see it split up?
No, we've made it very clear that we've got a report into what went on, and we've put in new leadership, and now we will look at how we make sure that Barnfield is structured for the best possible outcome for the students in the future. So that is still an open question, and we'll look into that over the coming weeks.
If this school had been under local authority control, don't you think these concerns would have surfaced sooner?
I don't think so, because as soon as the whistleblowers' allegations were brought to us, we acted immediately. So I think it's hard to see how we could have acted any more quickly than taking very seriously the whistleblowers' actions.
Another problem here was the rapid expansion of schools in this federation. Doesn't it make it more difficult to deal with when you've got multiple sites like this?
Dealing with Barnfield is a very important priority, and making sure that the education is as good as possible. And any education organisation that has difficulties as severe as this, clearing that up is always a difficult task, but we're absolutely on top of it. We've put new leadership in place already, very experienced leadership, and we'll take whatever action is necessary to get the best possible education.
But if there's more sites, doesn't that make it more difficult with the academy model creating these federations? Because this is a federation with real problems at its heart, as your report says.
I think what is important is that when allegations are brought to light, we acted very quickly. We've got new leadership in place. We've done a investigation and a report, and now we'll take action. And whatever the scale of an institution, what matters is that as soon as you find out that there's a problem, you grip the problem and you do whatever is necessary with, at the front of your mind, the interests of the pupils and the potential pupils in the area.
This is Barnfield's statement. We're tackling the issues raised by the report with the single aim of ensuring that Barnfield is a strong, fit-for-purpose education provider that puts its students, parents and staff at the forefront of its thinking and actions. So, Rupert Reed, we heard talk of multiple sites there. Do you think it does make it harder to get a grip, if you like, of a federation that's running multiple sites?
Definitely. Let's get to the root cause of the problem here. And the root cause of the problem is the academy system itself. This absurd system created, let's not forget, by a Labour government, continued by the current government, that enables rich people to buy access to the state education system for derisory sums. So a few rich businessmen control the education of our children. We in the Greens think that's completely wrong.
Well, let's put that point to Andy Salford. Labour introduced academies. Did you not foresee problems like this?
Well, under Labour there was an approach where if schools were really struggling over a long period of time, that to give them a fresh start they were made academies, but that was a very small number of schools in the overall scheme of it. The real problem now is that this government is pushing academies as their approach for all schools, particularly secondary schools now. There are very few left that are maintained. There are over 3,500 that have been created by this government, and there is very poor accountability, and they vary enormously. So I've got great schools in my area, but we hear some really difficult examples of poor leadership, of things going wrong, of poor financial management, and ultimately in the end, of course, we've got responsibility to the children.
So, Rupert Reed, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with the academy system. There'll always be underperforming schools, won't there?
Well, I think Andy's just admitted he created his party created the academy system, just like his party created PFI. It's no good him blaming the Conservatives for simply continuing something that they created. It's time for a real alternative. It's time for proper state education and proper public services. That's what the Greens are calling for.
It's a bit of point scoring unnecessarily. This Barnfield is going wrong 4 years into a Conservative government who have a completely different academies programme to the Labour programme, which was about poor and failing schools.
Different. It's merely a continuation of the same thing.
But actually, children are not interested in this kind of petty point scoring or even in the nameplate on the door of the school. They just want a good education.
Children don't want their education to be controlled by a few rich businessmen.
Tell me about the system of education that the Greens support then. Do you want things back in local authority control completely?
Yes, with stronger parent involvement and stakeholder involvement. And we want to see money not being put in by rich businessmen who then get to control what the children are taught. We want to see an education system that actually works for the benefit of the common good.
Andy Salford, academies are here to stay, aren't they?
Well, the Corby Business Academy in my constituency is teaching my nieces. They're doing really well, and of course I'll support those schools. There is, though, an issue about accountability. There is also an issue about where these are opened up, about school place planning. We've got a crisis of primary places in my constituency, so there is a proper role for government, and we shouldn't just abdicate education to the schools themselves.
All right, thank you. So now, for the political roundup of the week, when someone showed a clean pair of heels in the annual MP's pancake race, here's our 60-second roundup. Peterborough MP Stuart Jackson was delighted to hear this week that he's won his legal battle with the Parliamentary Expenses Watchdog over whether his house had gained in value. While Ofsted inspectors weren't pleased, the performance of children in Suffolk at key stages 2 and 4 is still well below the national average.
While I recognise and welcome the Ofsted report that has been published today, there are elements of that report that I don't agree with.
Patients at Northampton General Hospital didn't like the fact that all non-urgent operations had been cancelled because of the extreme pressure on accident and emergency. The Green Party is calling for action to allow the East Coast Main Line to remain in public ownership. But the MP for Cambridge, Julian Huppert, was ahead of the pack at the start of the MP's charity pancake race, but his team failed to take the tape at the end. Rupert Reid, tell me, why should the East Coast Main Line remain in public ownership then?
Because last year it made a profit of £208 million, and because it had a below-inflation price rise this year, unlike virtually any other part of the rail network. The East Coast Main Line is showing how a proper joined-up railway system could be run if we renationalise the railways, as our MP Caroline Lucas is hoping to do, and it's a real shame that the other parties won't get behind this.
Andy Salford, how concerned are you about the problems we saw there at Northampton General?
Very concerned. At Kettering General Hospital and Northampton, there are real pressures on accident emergency and other services, but I want to see new urgent care centres opened up, and I'm campaigning for that obviously in my area.
How quickly does that need to happen though? Because there's immediate pressure on services.
There is now an urgent care centre in Corby, but it's the only one in the county, so we need to see them across the county, which will benefit my constituencies and everybody in the area and relieve some of that pressure on accident and emergency.
OK, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you both for coming in today, Andy Salford and Rupert Reid. Thank you very much. Well, that's all for now. As always, you can keep in touch, of course, via our website, where you'll also find links to Deborah McGurran's blog for all the latest political updates. We're back at the same time next week, when we'll be looking forward to the budget and whether there'll be financial support announced for our cities. But for now, I'll hand you back to Andrew, and I'll see you soon.